ended, not the market yet, but the whole nature of regulation and EPA's authority. The Supreme Court has upheld EPA's discretion and their flexibility in devising solutions to the problems that they see. So it's an interesting time period right now to see where EPA goes next on CSAPR and SO2 and NOx policy, but also the implications of the Supreme Court decision, as I think we all well know, have implications for the 111D policy and supporting EPA's discretion and having flexibility trading programs and going after the CO2 as a pollutant. So it's an interesting time for the industry, and a speech here that I didn't imagine we would have so much uncertainty and interest going into. So I'm happy to provide my views. I apologize if I'm going to provide a groundwork and a framework for the history of SO2 and NOx policy. I'm sure everyone here is very well grounded in it, so please excuse me if I'm a little rudimentary, but I think it's an important context to set in relation to where we are today and where we might be heading forward. So with that, I'll start with the presentation. So history, and I think one of the things, I'll focus on CSAPR and where to the end where I think we are today and where we're heading. But I do want to talk a lot about the uncertainty and the progress we've made, but the challenges that lie ahead. I think that's really, understanding that is really crucial to understanding where we might go in understanding where the future of SO2 and NOx policy may be. So taking a step back, I think it's always important to ground ourselves in why are we regulating this, and I don't need to tell anyone here, but SO2 and NOx have pretty clear links to human health and I guess visibility problems, but that's the scientific foundation. That's the problem that we're all here to solve. And so EPA, in this regard, more so than CO2 arguably, has a pretty firm ground in its need to regulate SO2 and NOx emissions. So the Clean Air Act gives it very very solid authority to do so, and we've been living with that obviously for the last 20 years. So, that's the groundwork we're working on, the framework we're working under. Let's see here. Okay, so just to step back, the reason SO2 and NOx policy has so much uncertainty, I think, is because there's a lot of discretion, and it has to do with an ambient air quality standard. We all know achieving a certain concentration of ozone and PM in the atmosphere. So the focus naturally is less on one unit's individual stack emissions and is more about achieving wide ambient air quality standards. So in that, there's inherent flexibility for the use of trading programs and as well as looking at regional modeling and interstate transport issues. So it's an interesting, rather than mercury and some of the hazardous air pollutants, which have more human health impacts or more severe impacts to health. SO2 and NOx, there's a little bit of flexibility inherent in it, and I think that's an important grounding to understand, and it provides some element of flexibility, but also that flexibility introduces uncertainty into how EPA will ultimately can go about regulating the emissions. So just to step back, acid rain program, I think we're all well aware of that. It was the first emissions trading program, and it, in large degree, provides a framework for the 111D proposal on carbon. It was widely credited for achieving dramatic emissions reductions in a short period of time, cost effectively. And so, love it or hate it, it has brought us to the point now where we're talking about carbon trading systems and even further tighter caps under SO2 and NOx. I'm not going to go into the details of what was, but these slides are here for you to read. The challenge, though, with SO2 and NOx is, of course, is transport, interstate transport. It's very complex to understand the direct linkages between sources and receptors and how different units affect air quality among the regions. We can spend a few days looking at EPA's modeling and all of the nuances of the scientific understanding of how NOx and SO2 emissions get dispersed into the atmosphere. But I think it provides an interesting case study in how a regulator would, makes a determination as to an equitable distribution of costs and benefits across a region. Each state has its particular fuel mix and different cost structures with its generation fleet, yet there are regional air problems, and so it's a very interesting but difficult problem to solve as far as A, understanding where the emissions are affecting air quality, and B, how do you distribute those costs and effects, so costs and benefits. And so that's the challenge. We're all living with it, but that's where we are. So in that effect, to realize emissions reductions, to achieve the national ambient air quality standards, EPA has gone through a series of efforts, fits and starts with clean air interstate trading rule CARE, which the Bush administration first proposed. The DC Circuit, as we know, struck it down, then allowed it to remain in place while EPA developed an alternative. The courts determined that it was not stringent enough, so then EPA was back to the drawing board. With that, they developed CASPR, the proposal we all know about. During that time, the allowance prices, which for SO2 today range around $1, they were, for a large part in the early 1990s and 2000, were around $100 to $200. They spiked to $400 to $500 per ton, went up to $1,600 per ton, and then collapsed in response to the Supreme Court ruling striking down CARE and now it's been fairly flat around $1 per ton. So a lot of variability, a lot of money at risk, introduces complexity into long-term investment decision-making when you're banking on credits to make these retrofits. And so same with NOx. The market has been very volatile in response to all these different regulatory proposals and the Supreme Court decisions that have in turn struck down rules and then upheld certain provisions. So I think we're going to continue to see a volatile ride in the markets as the courts and EPA and stakeholders figure out what eventually will be a program that everyone can live with. I do want to point to the achievements that have been made. We see a dramatic reduction in SO2 and NOx emissions over the time period since 1980. Clean Air Act was tasked with achieving reductions, and it largely succeeded. You see here a 67% reduction by 2012, while electricity generation went up. You see population has increased, GDP has increased. So this is a very good success story, and it's a lot of people in the room here and others who have implemented back-end technology to reduce emissions, and it's cost-effectively achieve reductions in a way that provided flexibility for some units to choose not to and pay for emissions credits, other units to make retrofits to comply. So I think this is a good success story. I think it's important to note that we've made a lot of achievements. We have a ways to go, but I also want to point your attention to vehicle miles traveled. It's a proxy for transport emissions, emissions from cars, trucks, automobiles, and we've become more mobile, moved out into the suburbs more, and a lot more driving, and that in turn has increased a lot of the problem to ozone pollution. And I'll touch upon that point in the end, but I think it's important to note that that's a problem that's there, and we continue to drive more while our electricity consumption has largely flattened out. And we've achieved a lot of reductions from our existing fleet. We will be achieving more through implementation of MATS, but yet we still have challenges in the transportation sector that contributes still to a lot of the problem for NOx and ozone ambient air quality standards. So with that, this is where we currently stand with regards to. Sorry, a little bit of a delay here. So with regard to ozone, this is where we currently stand. This is attainment with the 2008 standard. You can see non-attainment largely focused in urban metropolitan areas where people live, industry is located, power plants are located, and a lot of people drive. With exception of California, unique to their geography in the Central Valley, they have challenges. This is the 2008 standard, which the CASPER rule and CARE, which is currently in place, is a more stringent standard than what we're currently complying with and what CASPER envisioned us to comply with. The CASPER rule originally intended for us to comply with the 1990 standard that was 84 parts per billion. This is 2008 standard, which is 75 parts per billion. So you see, we have some challenges yet to remain, a lot of progress, but still some reductions yet to be realized. Similarly, for SO2 and PM 2.5, we have still some areas largely centered around metropolitan regions where population lives and industry and activities occur. So this points to the need for further reductions. And with that, I'll move now into where we are today in the current environment. I appreciate everyone suffering through that long and belabored history. But as we all know, the Supreme Court upheld, or overturned, the D.C. Circuit's vacature of CASPER, and they upheld EPA's authority and its methodology to establish an interstate trading program. And they remanded the case back to the D.C. Circuit for EPA, or for the circuit to determine how EPA should proceed in their rulemaking. With that, in the meantime, states are complying with CARE, and some states are moving ahead with NOx rack requirements to force certain units, combustion turbines, to install controls or retire in order for them to achieve their air quality goals. New Jersey has done that. Connecticut is leading towards that, as well as New York, and Pennsylvania may be leading that direction, in that direction as well. With the implementation of MATS, largely the country will achieve its SO2 targets under CASPER. So when EPA first proposed CASPER, there were reductions envisioned under SO2. But with MATS implementation and the scrubbers or the unit retirements, as well as the dispatch, the different dispatch from the gas price declines from when CASPER was first proposed, SO2 we look to be in a very good situation. Aside from certain areas where a 1-hour standard will challenge certain facilities, SO2 reductions have or will have been achieved. With NOx, though, it's a different standard, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But I just wanted to touch upon that right now. So again, with the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court upheld EPA's authority to regulate and their discretion in determining neighboring states as, or individual states' good neighbor responsibilities to lower their emissions, to help other states achieve their air quality goals. And again, I mentioned before, but this has implications for 111D and the ability for EPA to go along with that plan. And you know, while there will be challenges and a lot of court cases, and Quinn talked a lot about that yesterday, this has emboldened EPA and goes a long way to suggesting that a lot of their plan may be given discretion by the courts. I'll flip through the next two slides. The CSAPR regions are similar to CARE with some extension. Texas and Florida are key focal points because one thing that the Supreme Court did determine was that the threshold for requiring states to join these interstate transport regions should be not more significant than would bring them into the program. So Texas and Florida, the EPA brought them under the program because their emissions contributed greater than 1% to the problem, but EPA was foreseeing them to have reductions that would bring them greater or reduce them that obligation. And so the Supreme Court said that EPA can't make them achieve reductions that are greater than their contribution. So I think for Texas and Florida specifically, the CSAPR and the rewrite of a rule, they may not need to comply as stringently as originally thought. So the focus right now, as far as CSAPR, is of course on a July 3rd briefing date with EPA. The parties, the DC Circuit has asked the parties to the litigation to provide briefs on how they think they should proceed. There were a lot of unanswered provisions or questions as far as challenges to the modeling approaches. Again, whether Texas and Florida should be included into the program that the DC Circuit didn't originally address in their ruling that vacated the rule. And so July 3rd, as I speak here today, there's not a lot of certainty as to what will transpire in the future, but July 3rd will be a key date, and EPA has been close to the vest in indicating where they are thinking on CSAPR. So it's an open guess as to what could happen, but in the meantime, CARE remains in effect, and there are 2015 reductions scheduled to take effect that will, again, for SO2 be less of a challenge, but for NOx will require some incremental reductions that may force some incremental installations of SCRs or NSCRs. Critical question there is allowance prices and or whether or not states will move to impose a RACT requirement on individual units as their method to attain their ambient air quality standards. A lot of questions about what could transpire. EPA could attempt to implement CSAPR as was previously written as early as January 1st, 2015. Some say maybe beginning May 1st, 2015, coincident with the ozone season, the summer ozone season. However, there are a lot of questions as to whether or not the original CSAPR rule and the reductions and the targets are relevant today, given the changes in the industry with less coal plants running, higher gas emissions down lower than actually what CSAPR would have required anyway. So there's a lot of thought that EPA may seek to revise the caps that CSAPR started. And so they may take a year or so to redo their modeling and assess which states are in and out and what the cap should be. So that could push implementation of a CSAPR phase 2 back to 2016. And then there's a thought too that EPA may scrap or put CSAPR on hold as was envisioned, and in lieu of that look to the 2008 ozone standard, which is more stringent, and repropose a new interstate transport rule, which they had previously announced that they were going to propose by October of this year. And they can basically scrap CSAPR in lieu of this new tighter rule, which would address the more stringent 2008 standard. And so that could take as much as 2 years to actually implement. So we could be talking implementation by 2015 January or as late as 2017. So a lot of uncertainty as to what course EPA will pursue. A lot of Wall Street analysts are speculating on that, and a lot of plants are in limbo, of course, complying with MATS. But this incremental requirement of an SCR or SNCR is a critical question that they will need to, I guess, hold on and wait until they have an idea as to what EPA is thinking. So with that, with SO2, there was a new 1 hour standard that EPA is working to implement. Again, SO2 reductions that have occurred because of the changes in the industry and dispatch from coal to gas, as well as the controls that will be installed from MATS. SO2 as a overall cap looks to be in good shape. However, there are some local areas in non-attainment that will struggle to meet a new tighter 1 hour standard. And this particularly, when you read Wall Street reports, they're very interested in learning which companies and which plants may be caught in that web. And the modeling is underway, and there's a lot of uncertainty and I guess caution around what will happen there. So that's something to look to as far as EPA's solutions for that and whether or not that will be brought into their CSAPR rule. As far as ozone, I mentioned that there's a tighter standard happening. The current standard that CSAPR was written to was 84 parts per billion to achieve. The 2008 standard is 75, and EPA is in the process of developing a new standard, which a recent court decision has required them to propose by December of 2014 and finalize by October of 2015. So under this current administration, plans are for them to propose a new ambient air quality standard that could be between 60 and 70 parts per billion. The Clean Air Scientific Advisory Board has recommended on the lower end of that, but the feasibility of achieving that standard may be called into question, and so we might see something towards more the upper end of the 60s. But either way, that's a very strict standard that will be difficult for the industry to achieve, or will be costly, and that's something that a lot of people have a lot of uncertainty about, and it's something, frankly, that I don't think anyone can really realistically predict what will happen. But that's something that's key to watch. And I'll show a draft or an image to show this. This is the 2008 standard. Again, CSAPR was written to the less stringent 1997 standard, but this is the 2008 standard, and you see regions that are in non-attainment. If you look at a potential 2015 standard, which will be proposed in December, final by October of 2015, we see large swaths of the country that will be called under this web. And so you look at the scale of reductions that might need to be achieved, and considering all the reductions that have and will continue to be made in the electric industry, you really scratch your head as to what can be achieved and at what cost. And I think that's the question that everyone's wrestling with. And that's the real, I think, bear in the room when you talk about what's next for SO2 and NOx. Again, this is on a long horizon. The NAAQS will be finalized. The new standard would be finalized in October of 15. This is potentially under a transport rule or CSAPR Phase 3. So we're talking about implementation over 2019 to 2021. So it's far out there, but it's something to look forward to in the industry. And seems as if every plant will have to have at least an SNCR, if not an SCR, and so you really scratch your head as to see what costs the industry will have to bear to achieve that standard. Again, I want to ground us in where we are a little bit. You see, since 2000, the industry has made a lot of achievements in SO2 and NOx reductions. CO2 down slightly, so progress being made there. All the while, electric generation has remained largely flat, and forecasts are for that trend to continue, or electric demand to decrease over time as energy efficiency takes hold. You see renewables and natural gas all growing significantly at the expense of coal. And the question is, can the coal fleet remain? And with these incremental new reductions, at what cost will we need to achieve them? And I'll flip through here just to show you where the CSAPR reductions were in relation to the CARE, the existing programs. And you see our emissions are at or below the cap of the existing cap. Phase 2 CARE, or CSAPR Phase 2, the 2014 rule would have required further reductions, but if you look out in the last couple of years, again with changes in the industry, it looks like for SO2 and the MATS implementation will be below what CSAPR was originally proposing. And aside from the 1 hour standard where local regions or plants might be affected, there doesn't appear to be a major problem to achieving an SO2 or PM 2.5 National Ambient Air Quality Standard. But if we look at seasonal and annual NOx, similar story, reductions are required from 2012 levels. Again, but this was written towards the 1997 standard, so the 2008 standard will require some incremental more reductions beyond that. But largely with trading, it seems like it's a feasible standard to achieve. All bets are off for the 2015 standard. So with that, I'll just like to end with some general points here. First is that the policy climate remains uncertain. I wish I could stand here today and tell you which plants will need to install what technology or close, but we're in a state of flux now, and I think we'll remain in a state of flux considering litigation and legal challenges for years to come. So I don't think there will be any silver bullet solution. I think we're going to have to suffer through this period for time to come, and I guess we've been doing so for the last 10 plus years, so I guess there's nothing new there. MATS will achieve many of or all of the SO2 reductions that were foreseen as required, aside from some certain local issues with the 1 hour standard. And broadly speaking, the electric sector has contributed many reductions, has been responsible for achieving a lot of reductions cost effectively. And the question is, what's going to happen going forward? Are we going to revert back to more of a command and control strategy for rack requirements and requiring every combined combustion turbine to have SNCRs? Or will we allow more trading and allow some flexibility, understanding that different regions of the country will have different impacts and costs bearing on them? It's a tough call, and I think that's something to look forward to the EPA, whether or not they double down on trading systems or allow states to impose more command and control regulations to either close facilities or require state-of-the-art control technology. And then finally, I'd like to point our attention to the bear in the room, which is mobile sources, which in New Jersey contribute over 50% of the contribution to the ambient to the ozone requirement. In fact, in New Jersey, power generation in 2008 only contributed 4% of NOx emissions in the state. And yet we have regions that are still in non-attainment and will be in non-attainment with the new standards. And so when a sector that has invested heavily to reduce its emissions is only contributing 4% of the overall amount, you have to wonder to what end will we say enough has been achieved by the electric sector and look to other sectors such as transportation, mobile sources. And that's a key question. It's a tougher nut to crack, but I think there's real opportunity perhaps for the industry in looking at transportation as an opportunity. If we electrify the transportation or move towards more of that, you can see power generation increasing, and you look at power generation growing 5%. what we're talking about, coal retirements and the viability of these plants that are producing, that's a dramatically different story. So it could increase their profitability and viability, all the while helping to achieve our air quality goals. So I know that's maybe a little pie in the sky. It's a tough challenge, but in New Jersey, we're starting to engage regulators on the need to look at achieving reductions outside of the sector, understanding that we've made investments and we've achieved incrementally, as cost effectively what the emissions reductions we could have, but it's maybe time to start looking at other sources and categories to achieve the ambient air quality standards. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and I'll take any questions, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Mark. Any questions from the audience?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Great, thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Our next presenter this morning is Kyle Neidig, and he is with Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems America, and he is going to be presenting on mercury oxidation in the SCR layer by layer performance, which means I'm going to get another science lesson, which is always great because this is the stuff that I need to learn more about. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.
You bet.
So as Todd said, I'm going to be talking more on the technical side, and as opposed to some of these other presentations we've heard over the time. Let me see if this. Can I use a? Can anyone see the laser pointer up there? I'm probably going to try and point some things out, so hopefully everyone can see. I'm going to focus my presentation on talking about using an SCR as part of your MATS compliance strategy. We've done quite a bit of testing both in the lab and in the field, so I'm going to share some of those results with you and then make an attempt of what do these results mean for building a strategy and optimizing the use of your SCR and existing controls equipment that are already in place on many units to comply with the MATS rule for mercury in specific. So as Todd mentioned, we're now Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems, so I feel I owe everyone an explanation. If you haven't heard already, as of February 1st, MHI and Hitachi Limited merged their thermal power businesses globally. The new company name is Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems, so that we're part of the Americas arm of that business. So just real quick, anybody have any idea how many coal-fired units are in the U.S. that have SCRs? Any idea? It's actually much lower than that on a percentage basis. There's probably somewhere over 1,000 units out there. Only 300 have SCRs currently. But whenever we look at those 300 units, the majority of those also have FGDs in place already. So whenever you look at the oxidation of mercury that takes place across the SCR, most of those units are also able to capture that oxidized mercury in the downstream scrubber. So a lot of units out there are already getting great mercury co-benefits, we call it, from the SCR and FGD. So I'm just going to focus a little bit on how can we optimize that process that's already naturally occurring in our plants. So another quick question, of those 300 units that are equipped with SCRs, what do you think the average size of those units are? Well, if I can get it to come up, it's about 550 megawatts would be the average size of those units. So these are the larger units that are already equipped with SCRs. Most of them have FGDs. They're probably the future of our coal-fired generation base in the U.S. So it makes a lot of sense to optimize and try and keep costs low on these units and comply with the rules. Oops, I'm bouncing ahead a little bit. All right, so if we just look at the mercury removal process as we go across a typical coal-fired power plant, you can see the mercury comes into the plant in the coal in the elemental form. You get some mercury oxidation that takes place throughout the combustion process, but the majority of the oxidation actually takes place as the flue gas passes across the catalyst. Oxidized mercury, much easier, much cheaper to take out, as I said before, especially if your unit also has an FGD. So in theory, you can get nearly 100% of the oxidized mercury removed in an FGD as long as you've got good chemistry there and you've got good, you're avoiding re-emission basically. So what are you left with at the stack? Well, you're left with basically anything you weren't able to oxidize. And that's why oxidation in the SCR is such an important factor. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I just want to point out, this is, we do a little play on words. We call it our track record. I'm going to talk specifically about the Mitsubishi Hitachi track type catalyst. It's an advanced catalyst for mercury oxidation. We now have 19 layers commercially operating of this product, 10 more layers that are planned to be installed over the next year. So this is a commercially available, commercially proven product, and it's being accepted by the industry as a plan and an approach to optimize your mercury emission reductions. There we go. So what are some of the main parameters that impact mercury oxidation in the SCR? There's 5 main ones that I'm going to talk about, that being ammonia to NOx ratio. That's key. As you have more ammonia, typically it's harder to oxidize mercury. They go after the same active sites on the catalyst, and catalyst was originally designed for NOx. That's the dominating reaction that wants to occur. The catalyst, as it ages and deactivates, it's no different than NOx. The mercury oxidation rate also deactivates and ages as the catalyst has been exposed to flue gas over time. Halogen concentration is a big one. You got to have halogens. It's the equivalent of your ammonia in the NOx reduction reaction. You use the halogens that are present in the fuel or added in the combustion process or downstream of that somewhere. But those are what are used with the catalyst to combine with the mercury to oxidize it. Temperature is another big one in the SCR. In general, the higher the temperature, the less mercury oxidation you're going to be able to get. Lower temperatures are definitely much more prone to oxidizing mercury. And another big thing that we're starting to learn more about, I should have said earlier, but we're constantly learning about what impacts mercury oxidation in the SCR. One of the things that we're more focused on now, more than ever before, is what is your elemental to total mercury ratio in the SCR? Has a huge impact. That last little bit of elemental mercury is much harder to get than whenever you have a very high ratio of elemental mercury. So the 2 that are shaded in blue there are the layer-specific parameters. As you go through your SCR, your ammonia to NOx ratio is going to change with every layer of catalyst, and you're going to oxidize some mercury with every layer of catalyst. So now your ratio of elemental to total mercury is going to be different for every layer of catalyst. So those are the 2 that I'm going to focus mostly on when we look at trying to build this strategy and what is the best location for getting mercury oxidation in your SCR. So just real quick, I'll hit on the deactivation rate. In general, the deactivation rate of the mercury activity of catalyst is very much in line with the deactivation rate of the NOx reduction activity. So whenever you look at those 2 things, you can probably still work on a similar catalyst management plan as what you were using in the past. This slide talks about temperature on the left-hand side and then the halogen or HCl concentration on the right-hand side. We compared, our track catalyst to conventional catalyst. Track in the blue, conventional in the dotted pink line, I suppose. And you can see for all temperature ranges, track catalyst has the ability to oxidize more mercury. And it has a similar trend. The higher the temperatures, you're going to get slightly reduced mercury oxidation compared to the lower temperatures. On the halogen side of things, the only point at which the 2 catalyst types are equal is whenever no halogens are present at all. And that's because really, in theory, you need the halogens, as I said before, to get any mercury oxidation. Be the equivalent of turning off your ammonia. You're not going to get any NOx reduction. So without the presence of halogens, you won't be able to oxidize mercury. But you can see, with any level of HCl or any other halogen present in the flue gas, the mercury oxidation rate across the track catalyst is significantly higher than the conventional catalyst. So before I get into the layer specifics, I want to discuss a little bit of the testing background and how some of these layer specifics were determined. So we do mercury oxidation testing in a lab, small scale. It's similar to a bench scale test that is very commonly used on catalyst. But we're using a lab scale because we don't want to inject mercury in the bench. It causes all kinds of different problems that we just, quite honestly, I don't think anyone is doing yet. I know people are looking at it, but no one is doing it yet. So everyone that's testing in the lab with mercury right now is doing it on this small scale lab testing. I don't want to go through the details of the test. The only thing I want to point out down here at the bottom of the screen is the note. In the lab, you cannot completely replicate all the different parameters and all the different things that are happening in the plant. So what we do is we're testing in the lab. We're implementing a set of correction procedures and correction curves to try and predict what the performance is in the plant based on that. And over the years and over our testing and our experience in comparing field results compared to lab results, we've been able to dial in on this fairly well. But as I said, there's always still things you're learning. There's things such as ash that are present in the field that you really can't account for, and what impact does that have? It's very difficult to determine. So we're learning and we're getting better every time we do a test, but we're still not 100% accurate in being able to predict the performance in the field with a lab test. Let me get the... Uh-oh. Okay, so as I said, this is just a general test that we did, kind of verifying what we're doing in the lab and correcting those results to what the field test is. We did test 1 and test 2 back in 2010, very good correlation, and then test 3, we came back to the same plant, same location, did the test again 2011 and got very good correlation again, as you can see. So I think we're very close to getting accurate results based on field, lab measurements, but you know, I just can't say 100% certainty that every plant is operating the same. There's always differences in every plant. So, if we look at layer-specific impacts, we look at 2 different scenarios, eastern bituminous case and PRB case. That's what they're calling them. Really, anytime from here on in the rest of the presentation, whenever I say eastern bituminous, you can replace that with a higher or moderately halogenated fuel, or whenever I say PRB, I'm talking a lower halogen fuel. So you can see for this, we looked at, as I mentioned before, the ammonia has a big impact, so we looked at 90% NOx reduction, so you've got a large amount of ammonia. In an eastern bituminous plant, we looked at what general rule of thumb, you know, about 20% of mercury is already oxidized entering the SCR. On the PRB, or the lower halogen fuel side, about 10%. And then the HCl is the big one. We used what we feel is a typical halogen level for eastern bituminous or a medium to higher halogen fuel. And then the lower halogen fuel, PRB style 5 ppm. So what are the results? So if we look at that and we just look at the ammonia to NOx ratio and what impact it has on mercury oxidation, you can see track in the red up here on the top and the conventional catalyst in the blue. So there's a little bit of an impact. As we said, the higher concentrations of ammonia reduce the ability to oxidize mercury. And that was consistently seen. But what happens whenever we introduce on top of this and we intermingle the concept of the ratio of elemental to total mercury in the SCR? So this next slide takes a look at that. I think I've got maybe in just general where your upper layers and lower layers in your SCR relative on this graph. So this next takes a look at what the impact is whenever you've got over here. This is it's hard to read, I'm sure, for some in the back, but this is the percentage of the available elemental mercury that can be oxidized across one layer of catalyst, starting at 0 all the way up to 90% on the scale. And then this is the ratio of elemental to total mercury at the inlet of that layer of catalyst. So if we look at that, it's a huge impact to what we thought we knew from layer by layer results based on just the ammonia impact. So if we look at this typical eastern bituminous plant, our upper layer is somewhere, you know, in that 30% elemental or more remaining. Lower layers typically less than 30% elemental remains. So what's the impact and the difference between a track or an advanced catalyst specifically designed for mercury oxidation and a conventional catalyst? Well, it's about 2 to 3 times more mercury oxidation in your upper layers, and it's about 5 to 10 times more mercury oxidation in your lower layers, where that mercury becomes very hard to go after and get, where there's not as much elemental left to go after. So what's the impact of this? What does it mean? Well, you know, just from this graph, it's still hard to tell. You know, you've got a lot more elemental mercury in your upper layers, so maybe it's better to put an advanced catalyst in your upper layer. But you get more benefit in the lower layers relative to a conventional layer. So where's the balancing act? So what we did was we looked at 6 different cases. We looked at a base case where you use 4 layers, all conventional catalyst. And then we looked at 4 more cases where you put a layer of advanced catalyst in either the first, the second, the third, or the fourth layer. And then we looked at a 6th scenario where you used advanced catalyst in all layers. So you can see for this plant, the conditions that I laid out earlier, you know, they're getting about 83% mercury oxidation just with conventional catalyst. So that's pretty good. That's not too bad. If they were to put a track layer in the first layer, they're up to 90%. Second layer, similar, about the 90%. Third layer, we see a little bit of a benefit, 93%. Now in the fourth layer, we're up to 95%. So if we look at that, and then, you know, another thing to point out is in this last layer, only 96%. So does it even make sense on a higher halogen fuel to go to advanced catalyst in all layers? You know, maybe not, probably not really. So if we look at that, first or second layer, you're running your catalyst management plan, it's time to replace a layer of catalyst, but you're due to replace your first or second layer. It's not a bad location for track, it's just there's other options out there that are better. So the third or fourth layer is more ideal location for the track. You know, this is all, you know, based on lab testing. There's errors in the measurements and everything. So who's to say there's a big difference between 93 and 95% in this? It's tough to say, right? So I think third or fourth layer are both really good locations to put in advanced catalyst. And as I said before, if you look at the bottom layer, there's really not much benefit to putting in all four layers. So if we look at this, what impact does this have on actual mercury emissions at the stack? If you look at 83% mercury oxidation compared to 95% mercury oxidation in your SCR, and you're assuming a good capture efficiency in the FGD, you're actually looking at a 70% reduction in the stack mercury emissions at this plant. So it doesn't seem like a lot when you're looking at percentages, but when you're looking at what actually makes it to the stack, it's a huge impact. So what can we take away from this on the higher halogen fuel side? Really, an advanced catalyst installed anywhere is going to give you some benefit, but if you have your choice, it's probably better to install it in the lower layers. So same thing for the lower halogen fuel. I'll run through this a little bit quicker. It's the same analysis, the only difference is the halogen concentration is much lower. So again, very similar relationship on the ammonia to NOx molar ratio. Upper layers, again, a little bit less compared to lower layers. Until we factor in the impact of the, if I can get to it, the mercury speciation. You can go to the next slide. There we go. So again, now the curve looks completely different, you know, after we implement in the concept of this different molar ratios of, different ratios of elemental to total mercury. And again, we look at our upper layers compared to our lower layers and the differences between the advanced catalyst. We're getting about 3 to 4 times more mercury oxidation activity in the upper layers and maybe 5 to 8 times more in the lower layers. So again, what does that mean? Well, we're looking at roughly 38% mercury oxidation with 4 layers of conventional catalyst, boosting it up to 51 when track is in the first layer. When track is in the second layer, it's boosted up to 53, 56 in the third layer, and 59 in the fourth layer. But if you look here, you know, you can go, if you get to all track eventually, right? You know, no one's probably going to go out and say, I just want to take all my current catalyst out and put in track. But over the years, as you're replacing catalyst, maybe every couple years, eventually you could get to a point where you might have all track. And we look at roughly 80% mercury oxidation at that point. So what can we say? We can say actually going from 38 to 51%, that's a pretty good location for track. That's not too bad at all. In the lower layers, it's even a better location. But what's the ideal scenario here? The ideal scenario is installing track eventually to a point where you get as much of it in the box as you can, because you're going to get a noticeable benefit every time you put another layer in. So if we were to look at this again, you know, what it means at the stack, if we went from 38% mercury oxidation in our SCR to 80% mercury oxidation in our SCR, we're looking at roughly a 68% reduction in the stack mercury emissions. So, you know, in conclusion, what do we say for PRB? We can say really any layer is a good layer to install track, and the more track you have installed, the more benefit you're going to see on mercury. So, this just talks in concept again, you know, boosting your oxidized mercury percentage by a little bit always ends up in reduced emissions at the stack, as you know, assuming you're getting good removal efficiency across the FGD. So a little bit on full-scale results now. We've done a couple tests. We haven't been able to do as much testing or as elaborate testing as we've been able to do in the lab, just because of the cost implications associated with doing the mercury testing on the full-scale side. So this is one unit, bituminous fuel, so higher chlorine in the fuel. You can see the fuel range from about 43 to 120 ppm in the fuel. This unit, they wanted to install the lower layer catalyst to be their advanced track catalyst, so they actually moved this bottom layer up to the top, and then in the empty layer in the bottom installed track. So they had the same three catalyst layers that they had before, and just basically added a layer of track catalyst in the bottom. And here's the results. We measured at the inlet of the SCR, after the first three layers, and then at the outlet of the SCR. And at the inlet of the SCR, the average, we're in that 10 to 15% mercury oxidation range. After the first three layers, we're in that 40, 50% range. And then we're up here close to 75% at the end. So whenever you look at that and what was achieved and oxidized across one layer of the track catalyst compared to three layers of a conventional catalyst, the actual activity ratio of track was close to 5 times higher than the conventional. And that's in line with what we were able to predict in the lab tests that we did. Similar, this is now for PRB unit. We actually have 3 units we studied in this. We've got Unit 1 and Unit 2 that have 3 layers of conventional catalyst, 1 layer of track, and Unit 4, which has 4 layers of just conventional catalyst. Oops, we skipped ahead. So if we look at that, here's the speciated mercury test results. But if you look here, at the SCR inlet on all 3 units, you're less than 5% mercury oxidation. On the 2 units that have track, you're somewhere in that 40 to 50% mercury oxidation at the outlet of the air heater. And on the unit that didn't have track, you're somewhere in that 10 to 15% range. So again, you can see a significant benefit, about 3 times more mercury oxidation with that last layer being track compared to not having the last layer be conventional catalyst. So we took this and said, okay, so what does all this mean? It's good, we want to oxidize mercury, but financially and for compliance with MATS, what's the impact? So I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'll run through these numbers fairly quickly here. We looked at really 4 cases. We looked at, again, our eastern bituminous case with an ESP. We looked at an eastern bituminous case with a fabric filter. We looked at a PRB case with an ESP and a PRB case with a fabric filter. And we compared using catalyst, conventional versus an advanced catalyst in those units to what you needed to do if you were going to trim with activated carbon to get you to compliance with MATS. So whenever we looked at that, this happens to be the bituminous case, the eastern bituminous case with no fabric filters, ESP. So whenever we looked at that, and I believe this is based on a 3 layers of catalyst analysis, an SCR that had 3 layers in it. If they were looking at all 3 layers being non-track catalyst, they were going to oxidize close to 88% at this unit. Assuming about 95% removal efficiency in the FGD of that oxidized mercury, now they're removing about 83% of the total mercury that was coming into the plant. It gets them close to MATS compliance, but not quite there. It's a bituminous fuel. You've got some SO3 there in the flue gas, so activated carbon consumption is going to be a little bit higher as it goes after the SO3 first. They were looking at having to inject about 4 pounds per million actual cubic feet of activated carbon to trim to get them into MATS compliance. Activated carbon costs at a 500 megawatt plant, roughly $4 million a year for them. So over an 8-year period, they were looking at a MATS compliance cost of somewhere in that $30, $35 million range. Whenever they implemented track catalyst, and these were based on what we were able to perform, how we were able to perform through the entire guarantee period, or for basically 16,000 hours until they would be up for another catalyst action anyway, based in their normal catalyst management plan. And whenever we look at that, we were able to oxidize 95% of the mercury in this unit, greater than 90% removal inherent after you go downstream of the FGD to the stack. And the differential cost of track catalyst is nothing, essentially, and compared to what they were going to have to spend in activated carbon costs. So implementing a strategy in your SCR and focusing on the pieces of equipment that are already there saved this plant over 8 years roughly $35 million. We did the same thing with fabric filter. I'm not going to run through it in a lot of detail. The only difference is the activated carbon usage rates are much lower because you get a much better treatment time on the bags. There we go. So you can see instead of the 4 pounds, they're roughly at a half a pound per million actual cubic feet. But still 8 years, roughly $4 million compared to about $1 million. So roughly $3 million in savings on a unit, even with the bag house. If we look at the PRB case, this is a little bit jumbled just because it looks at the additional benefits as you go from 1 layer after 2 for about 2 years. Then you need another layer of catalyst and your mercury oxidation rate increases. But the general story here again is that, at the less you oxidize in the SCR, the more activated carbon you're going to have to use as trim to get you into MATS compliance. So whenever we look at it, best case scenario again is after these 8 years, we use a kind of a weighted average of what they were going to have to use on activated carbon throughout that period as they're transitioning from a conventional catalyst to an advanced mercury catalyst. And we're looking at $44 million in compliance for MATS compared to roughly $24 million, so about a $20 million savings. And same thing with a fabric filter. Again, the only thing that's changed is the injection rates and the usage efficiency of the activated carbon. And now you're looking at roughly from $6 million to somewhere $3.5 million. So right in that $2 to $3 million savings range. So there's a lot to be said about implementing a practice with your SCR that, a lot of people out there, a lot of people sitting in this room already have units with SCRs and FGDs, and optimizing your approach with those existing pieces of equipment without question is going to save money in the cost burden of complying with the MATS rule. So I believe that's all I have. If there's time for questions or anyone has anyone, I'd be happy to attempt to answer.
There is time for questions. So if there are any questions from the floor? One up here. Hold on, he'll give you a mic.
Thank you. So Kyle, can you talk a little bit about the SO2 to SO3 conversion rate of track versus conventional, or the conventional low SO2 to SO3 catalysts?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is what happens to the conversion rate of SO2 to SO3 whenever you use the advanced track catalyst. And in general, the only difference with the track catalyst is its ability to oxidize more mercury. So for the majority of applications and operating conditions that exist out there, we can get the same SO2 to SO3 conversion rate, same NOx performance activity with track catalyst. The only difference is we get that about 2 to 3 times higher activity ratio on the mercury side.
Any other questions?
All right, thanks for your time, guys.